Merci On a l'honneur de recevoir Amel Bennaceur, qui est associée de professeur à Open University et qui va nous faire une présentation sur la collaboration. Et donc, en fait, Amel travaille essentiellement en génie logiciel, puis tout ce qui est, je ne sais pas comment on dit en français, trustworthiness. La confiance, la confiance et la résilience des systèmes intelligents. Donc, voilà. Merci beaucoup pour ta présence et d'avoir accepté notre invitation.
Merci. C'est un plaisir d'être parmi vous et de parler français aussi. C'est un peu nouveau. Par contre, pour ce qui est technique, je préfère switcher en anglais. Même si le français est une de mes langues maternelles, j'ai perdu un peu la main dans tout ce qui est technique. OK? Mais vous pouvez poser les questions en français, je comprends très bien. Okay. So let's start then. So today I'm gonna. Got it. Oh, okay. I'm gonna tell you about our work, which is a lot goal-driven and for collaboration. So the main message. Okay. So the main message is nothing worthwhile can be achieved in isolation. So whether it's people or agent, they can achieve more. And they can satisfy more goal through collaboration. So the question we're going to try to answer, once we sort out the clicker, is how to enable collaboration between autonomous agents and AI agents, and also how to enable collaboration between autonomous agents and human. So the first question, though, is what do I mean by collaboration? And to explain what collaboration means, I'm going to use a matrix around two axes. The first one is whether we consider individual systems or ensembles of systems. And the second axis is focusing on levels of cognition. So the first level is a reflexive level, and that means that systems take some input and generate some output. So when we are talking about individual system, we're talking about automatic systems. And when we talk about ensembles, then we talk about distributed systems. The second level of cognition is reactivity. So in this case, the systems doesn't only produce the output based on the input, but also based on the state it's in. So, and that leads us to adaptive systems when we for individual systems and connected systems when we talk about ensembles. And the third level is about reasoning. And what we mean here is to produce an output, to produce an action, we need the inputs, the state we're in, and a goal. And that's what we mean about collaborative systems here, or like autonomous systems as well for individual, but collaboration is about reasoning about ensembles to achieve goals. And for that, then the second question is, what are those ensembles made of? So the ensembles can be pure services, so pure cyber, they can be robots, so cyber physical, they can be really tangible resources, and they can be socio-technical systems, so people and software, they can be multiple groups of people and robot system, or they can be just people. So, but the question remains is how to achieve goals and how to represent and reason about goals. So in this talks, I'm going to take three types of examples that I'm going to show. The first one is about collaboration between robots, so two systems, and I'll show and apply to security. And we'll show how we can reason about goal and achieve them through mediation. The second level, we will consider a software and a system, and we will see how we can also weaken and relax assumptions about what users want to do and still assure the satisfaction of goal. And I'll take an example from voting systems. Right? And the third one is what we call like, it's really around collaboration between individual robot here and groups of people. And we will focus on, so we will take an example from emergencies and show how reasoning about social interaction and social group can allow us to achieve goals. So the first one, let's start then by collaborative security, and I'll show you an example on what it means. So in this scenario, I kind of
Amel, you forgot your phone.
So I forget the phone. The first thing that the humanoid robot does is calling, so that the user,
My friend,
the user doesn't come back. So then the idea is to have the two robots working together to achieve the goal. You can see that also it's a room, so you can stop it, like you can just lock the room, which often happens. You just have a swipe card, but that means you kind of make the room completely impossible and inaccessible. So in this, we wanted to kind of make the two robots work together to protect phone from theft. So and they do so by taking the phone and hiding it under the sofa. So now it's secure. Okay, so a toy example, but the idea is we have a set of goals. So in this case, we want to protect the phone from theft, and we want to keep the room accessible. We have an ensemble of, a log, humanoid robot that can speak and talk with big object, and we have a robot that can clean and move. And the idea of collaborative is really bridging the gap between these two areas. So the first step is actually reasoning about goals. So what goals do we have? We want to avoid phone theft, and we want to maintain the room accessible. Okay, so that's at the high level. But at the high level, this is, we need to refine it to understand really what control we can have. And so at the control level, then we have, for example, we want to, when the user leaves, then we lock the door. And in this case, we assume that by locking the door, then the phone is safe. But it's also hurting this requirement. We can have the second one is when the user leaves, then eventually we call them. But that assumes that the user can hear you, and when they hear you, they come back. And then that's the third system. The third control is when the user leaves, then we pick the phone and put it in a safe place, and that assumes that there is a safe place, that the room is adequately lit, and that you can really pick the phone. Okay, and there is another level of refinement where we say what features do we need. Okay, so we can have text to speech, we can have object recognition, motion, and everything. So the second step for us is to understand the features and the behavior of individual systems. So in this case, for example, even if we want to select only motion and object recognition, then there are dependencies about other features. So, you have to have robot posture, you have to activate the sonar so that you don't flip. So that enables us to pick the features from the individual systems. Why do we do that? Is because usually those behavior, even for those humanoid robots, they are quite complex and they're quite big. So it's still kind of a clean version for presentation of the behavior. But the idea is once you select a few features, you can project the behavior and make it simple. And the idea that why do we need to do that is because we need coordination of the two behavior. So the idea is how do we make this property satisfied? And we do that through synthesis. So we generate a third system that coordinate the behavior of the two so that this property is verified. So synthesis, there are multiple ways, some of them based on game theory, some of them based on normal planning, but like forward planning or exhaustive search. And that's why it's limited, and you don't want to have super, super complex behavior. Okay, so summarizing, we have a partially ordered set of goals. We have a set of components, each with their capability. We have an environment. So the idea is that each individual component by themselves cannot satisfy the goals. Just putting the system together, it's not just because the robots are in the same room that they can do it. So it's finding the subset of component and synthesizing a mediator such that when put together, they satisfy the goal. Okay, so that's what we were able to do, but there is also this.
Amel, you forgot your
When
phone.
there is also this failure, we have a case where we're assuming that the human will come back and they don't. And so the second question for us is, how do we deal with like obligations on users? And sometimes we're assuming too much about the user. And to show that, I'll kind of inspired from a real case, and that's of the voting systems and election fraud in Kentucky. So the idea is this software had, assumed that the voter will put an ID and password, they select a candidate, vote for their candidate, and actually confirm before exiting. However, a lot of voters exit once they press the vote button. They assume that it's done and they leave. And what happens is that you had like malicious election officials that can enter and change the vote, go back and change the vote. And that's what vote flipping is about. So then the question is how to actually revise the existing software to prevent those kind of failure. So here the goal is quite simple. We want to avoid vote flipping, but then we have a voter, a voting machine, and an election official. So the idea is first, how do we refine that vote flipping into a property that we can implement? And there are multiple ways you can express this requirement. You can express the requirement that once the voter cannot exit the booth until they confirm, right? You can do it multiple ways. You can post it, you can educate them, you can do a lot of things, right? But what we're really interested in is, can we design the software to stop this without putting extra thing on the user? So here what we were saying is the distinguishing action. So the password, once you enter the password, then the election official cannot select another voter. And that's what we were doing with that. Okay. So then how do we do that? So the first thing is we see how the voter behaves. So the way we're assuming that the voter will behave is they enter the password, select or go back, vote and go back, confirm and exit, right? But actually it's not true. We can't oblige them to do that. So we kind of relax the voter behavior. They can do more now. So basically they enter their password and they can do whatever they want, right? And then they exit. So, and it's the same actually. So the machine, the software cannot distinguish between the voter and the election official. The only distinguishing action is actually the password. So the idea then is, can we compose all this and see where this property is violated? So if I come here, you can see that if the person entered, where is it? Okay, here. The voter enter their password, select, vote, exit, then you can have the election official entering, going back, selecting another and vote. So those are actually all the states that that kind of violate this action. So here then, can we use synthesis for that? And the idea is synthesis usually, it just stop actions from happening or coordinate actions. It cannot flip actions. So the main idea is then we extract the action that is critical, and we abstract such that we can reuse synthesis, right? And we once we do that, we actually can synthesize multiple controllers that enable that action to happen. So in here, basically it does that. So once you select, you can go back, but once you enter the password, you can no longer go back. Or you can select and go back, vote and come back, but entering the password and then is that. So all those controllers will force that property to be achieved. But as you can see, these are more constraining on the voter themselves, because that means once you enter the password, they cannot change their vote or so by the end, it means that you have other goals. So you want a little bit more usability, so you can choose this one. And if you pay attention, is actually often what happens. So like, on e-commerce or on those websites, you can play with your cart, but at the end, when you want to validate, you have to enter your password. And that's a design that often happen in many kind of almost the best practice, but that kind of here we can prove why it's a best practice, okay? So summing up, what we have is we have basically an environment where some properties are verified, but what we want is to relax actually the assumption about the user. So we're almost creating another environment that violate that actions. And then the second step is to revise the specification of our software. So finding and synthesizing synthesizing a mediator that make that that property verified. And it can go on until, because it can fail as well. You can assume nothing from you can want to assume nothing from the user, but maybe by assuming nothing, you achieve nothing. So we want to find the weakest assumptions about the user that will allow us to satisfy that property. Yeah.
What is C on the bottom right?
Here, that's the controller. That's the mediator. It's our mediator. Okay. So by the end, we can find actually a new machine that's made up of the controller and that satisfy our S. Okay. So one of the things though is here we're focusing on one user at a time. And often you need interaction of groups. Also, the other thing, and we're assuming that users are basically just action and reaction, which is not often the case. There's more drivers to human behavior than just stimuli and action. Okay, so to illustrate that, I'm going to take an example from emergencies. So robots are used a lot by first responders now. Situational awareness, dealing with unforeseen events. But what we're really interested in are what we call zero responders. And zero responders are people who are there when the emergency happens, right? And that they can help each other and really change how the emergency response is carried out. And there are multiple cases where this is really critical. So we had examples from like the Manchester bombing, for example, where even though the police was there, they weren't allowed even to enter, like the police and the emergency, so even the ambulance were there, they weren't even allowed to enter because they didn't know whether it's safe or not. So people were helping each other and want to help each other, but then so often you don't know how to coordinate that action. So coordinating the zero responders and coordinating the zero and first responders is what we want to do. So in this case, we have goals. So we want to minimize evacuation time, maximize the number of evacuation, and actually engage those zero responders. And so we have groups of first responders, groups of zero responders, and that system. So again, how do we reason about those zero responders and first responders? Usually, and And that's often when, especially when we're thinking about safety, we model humans the same way we model machine, automata, right? So, and that's kind of responses to stimuli. But then, okay, humans may not behave like automata. How? They don't do always what we want them to do. So you associate uncertainties or probabilities. But actually, it's not only that. There are drivers. There are more to human behavior than that. So kind of increasingly, there is a kind of a movement to more ontological levels. So you want to specify, you know, opportunities, willingness, capabilities. And that's kind of better, but it still sees a user on their own. So one of the things that we can learn actually from other disciplines is the idea of one of the drivers of human behavior is actually the groups they belong to. And that's actually very important in emergencies. So there are a lot of kind of evidence from social psychology around how group form during emergencies. And one of those theories is like the social identity theory, and it stipulates that actually in emergency, there is the emergence of a shared identity. So something like we're in this together, we help each other, and that kind of drive the helping behavior. So, however, not everyone develop that shared identity. There will be also people who will, you know, privilege their own safety and focus on helping themselves. So the idea here then, but one of the things is the more you deviate from the group behavior, there is a payoff loss. So that payoff loss can be, for example, you know, anxiety, like, or even like disappointing the group. So that kind of have an effect on the person transgressing the group behavior. So our idea here then is how to enable autonomous system to reason about and leverage that identity to achieve goals. So one of the things is that social identity is a psychological state. So we can't just sense it, right? However, there are actually markers of that identity. So people who are in proximity, for example, this is where I look at the status like, okay, who is next to you? But there is also in emergencies, they move into the same direction, for example. So there are all those markers. And one of the key markers is actually language. People who belong to the same group will have our, like, you know, references to we and us. So there is this sense of togetherness. There is that kind of social bond, like, what do I do now? Like, you know, there's kind of that support, but also there is like the shared emotion and, you know, the empowerment. So actually we can use, for example, language as an indirect variable that allow us to see who is in the same group or not. And we do the same. So we do, like, for emergencies, basically we have, you know, we want to maximize identity payoff, we want to minimize evacuation time, maximize the number of evacuation, but we're assuming that also humans seek to align with their social identity, right? So you want to align with that group. And based on that, basically what we did is, like, we create a game theoretic model for the robot to find the best strategy to coordinate those groups. So we kind of have an evaluation of whether or not they develop their shared identity, and the robot can ask a person to help another person, or actually ask help from the first responders. And that can be modeled, like, you know, as a Bayesian game model with the two agent robot survivor and responders. Okay, so what we did then is, like, we simulated, so you may see this kind of little car, that's our robot that kind of explore the emergency and then try to coordinate the action of the different people. So that simulator, we didn't create the simulator, but the simulator is based on empirical evidence on how people help other people And that's kind of also done by social psychologists on mass emergencies and how they work. So then one of the things for us is we train the identity markers. We have those adaptive robots that generate adaptation to the identity, evaluate the identity. And we did the simulation, compared it to other strategies. So one of the best graph actually is this one. So we had multiple intervention, one that you have no support, one robot that always assume that people will help, so a pro-social oriented, another version who assumes that people will never help, and that's the pro-self oriented, and then the one that as kind of reason on the identity and use it to evaluate how to coordinate the action. So the main idea, and this one is, that means that this adaptive robot really improves on the evacuation time. However, I said actually that this is the best graph because actually it depends on the parameters. So in cases where there are a lot of first responders, the robot has no effect. So if you have enough, professionals to help and coordinate the emergency, the robot, that doesn't have any effect. It doesn't make things worse, but it doesn't improve them.
But if you have lots of first responders who are not doing anything, then it makes it worse, right?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. But yeah, so we assume that if they are there, they help. That's one of the things. Also, when situations are so critical, and that kind of, you can simulate it through the fall and how you can bring back the person to the exit. If it's so critical that you have everybody is injured, also the robot doesn't have enough effect because you don't have enough help. So it doesn't make things better. But actually, really kind of in situation where you don't have enough emergencies, there is, but not enough. And the situation is, there are people who are injured, but there are also people who are able to help. This is where the effect is the best, actually. So that's one of the findings. So there are situations where it's better. And actually in reality, there are a lot of those situations because first responders are a scarce resource and you want to kind of people to help in those situations, okay? So basically the main idea is we have an identity predictor. We use it to create a game model of how people interact together, and then solving the game will lead us to a winning strategy, okay? And that's kind of published here. It's a recent publication, so and open access. But also because it's new, it has a lot of limitation. So there are a lot of things that we want to explore next. So one of the things is we were really focusing on emergencies, and part of the motivation for that is we have all this evidence around helping behavior groups and how they behave. So it would be really interesting to see how that translates into other domains, including, for example, on how developers like software developers come together when there is an incident, and how something like an AI agent can coordinate those developers for kind of dealing with that incident. Here we were considering one robot at a time. So there might be also another option where you have multiple robots working together and not only one at a time. I mean, here you can deploy multiple, but they are not coordinating. And the third one is values, actually. So we were really focusing on functional parameters, but there are also a lot of parameters that we didn't actually take into account and that are relevant. So we call them like SLEEK, so social, legal, ethical, empathy, and culture. So one of the things, for example, is understanding the behavior and the perception of people even the drones in different contexts. So, for example, here we were really doing talking to stakeholders in the UK and in like attacks and emergency responders, but we actually started working with like emergencies in refugee camps, and that kind of consideration of drones is completely different. Yeah, how people perceive even the drones is very different. There is the legal requirements, so in terms of what happens if the robot asks a person to help and then they don't survive. Oh, who is liable, how we do with that. There's also the robot is making trade-off and evaluation. So how to make actually ethical trade-off? Are we making the right trade-off, etc. There's also the empathy. People are distressed in emergencies. How can the robot not just be functional, but also have display that, you know, understanding and support with the different people. And actually, there's a part which is culture, and it's kind of embedded somehow in the simulator, but you know, the helping behavior also depends on gender, class, you know, age, for example. You know, younger people have more tendency to help older persons. Men have tendency to help more women. So, and that kind of, we're focusing on the identity, which is a superordinate feature and identity, but there are other features that play when we reason about helping behavior. So we actually focused on really values in other contexts. So we wanted, for example, thank you, Baba. We focus on, for example, gender inclusivity, for example, but that's one value. And what we used is actually emotion as a proxy for values, because values are really hard to kind of even elicit. We also considered like fairness, and fairness, for example, is very resource dependent. So, you know, there are fairness-based choices or fairness choices when you have actually scarce resources, right? So how do we kind of reason about that? But here, for example, we were really considering one value at a time and considering them before deploying the system. We started actually exploring a more dynamic way of considering values. But the main assumption of this work is that actually you know your values when you are making choices. So examples, we took an example from food, but basically, you know, everybody cares about sustainability until they have to pay a price for it. And this is where you know the trade-off and how your values compare. So that's kind of the main idea of that. Okay. So exploring a lot of things, but we have not yet a answer to our sleep. So summing up, I started by, you know, we wanted to reason about gold and assure collaboration. We then discovered that actually there is a need to deal with failure, and actually failure especially for a human. So we explored how you can kind of still weaken assumptions about humans and still guarantee something, but then, okay, how do we engage humans? So we looked at then groups and group behavior, but we still need to think about values and how we integrate values and goals together. So we ended up with more questions than we started with, but that's how it goes. And actually coming back to, especially when we talk about values, coming back to our first example. So we want to go actually to a reflective mode, where you don't assume that goals are already given to you, or like, and especially when it's values, you want to be aware of those values and reflect about them. So a system where, you know, where the actions is not only changing the output, but also adapting the goals and the values. And yeah, so thank you very much. That's for the postdoc that want to join later, but thank you. Yeah.
Go back to the example you have with the voting system.
Where we have
The voting.
Ah, yes, yeah.
So
Okay.
the model is quite simple. I'm wondering how much does it scale this kind of approach, or you synthesis defining the model? Because I mean, I've played with it a bit, and what I noticed is it works really well on simple examples like this one.
Yes.
But on this one, you can also ask a human to find the right model.
Yes, yes.
So where it's interesting is when you consider much larger models.
Yes. So we didn't tested it, so we don't know. So it also depends on the property. So, you know, for safety properties, it probably can scale quite high, like most model checker will go to hundreds and thousands of states.
Yeah, but you're doing it the other way, you're doing a synthesis of the model.
We're doing a synthesis, but even synthesis for safety properties can scale pretty well. And that's why, you know, we generated multiple options, and then for usability, you choose, because usability is more for liveness property, right? So liveness breaks often synthesis. And there are kind of people looking at, like, for example, GR1, which is a smaller set of liveness properties. So it depends really on the properties. And when we do safety is good, we can scale, like at least theoretically.
Yeah.
But once we go with liveness, it breaks. But there's another, not us, but there is another group at CMU who are actually took the approach, which is like the deviation, and used actually SAT solving and used alloy to do a version that is actually more scalable and stronger. So I think so the main author is Unsung Kang at CMU, and they published actually at ICSI 2023. So yeah.
That was actually my question. So can we use the checking to push? So
Yes.
what they have.
Yeah. So they used alloy. We used LTSA, just because we were really kind of interested in the overall kind of how it works, and LTSA is easy. So and also we know the people who create LTSA, so it's easy.
And if we would have used AI, how would we do it?
I don't know. It might be actually something that's worth exploring. The only thing is, how do we? It's probably easier, like just kind of or formulating it as a search rather than a synthesis. I think the thing that I'm not sure about when we use AI is, how do we prove that the property is verified, satisfied? Yes.
I guess you can just apply model checking
On the result. Or
because
that,
it is,
yes.
or if you use that, you check out that, be able to verify it is correct.
Yes.
But if you have a model checker, you can just run it.
Yeah. That would be one.
Questions?
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if we come back to the example of developers.
Of the?
Developers, if you, so for example, I guess someone had find a bug and they try to solve the bug, so.
Yeah. As kind of, this is, we haven't explored it at all. So it's kind of, is almost like the next step for us, is seeing more than a bug, is really when there is a huge incident and you require multiple team.
What do you mean by a huge?
So say, for example, security incident or kind of a breakdown of the service and people have to come like multiple groups. And it's like usually the developers are really kind of each like one's these, I don't know, dedicated to the testing and everything. And kind of, can we have a co-pilot basically that will tell people how to coordinate that action? But we didn't test it. We still kind of have to refine it. Yes.
I think the main concern will be to have the data.
Understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because it's sensitive, because incident, for example, is quite a sensitive thing. It can be a bug, but it can be also malicious, right? And yeah.
But to be honest, it will be really interesting to see.
Yeah.
But I think it might have some more on how developers behave when trying to find the bugs.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes. Happy to.
donc s'il y a pas de questions, on va remercier notre conférencière et
Thank you.
merci beaucoup.
Merci. Thank you online.